Professor Pallas here with the weekly wrap-up for week 4 of NTD 420. Let's start by taking a look at the results of the weekly class poll. This week we talked about the social influence hypothesis. This hypothesis posits that social networks influence who becomes or who stays obese. We asked you as a class to answer this question: which of the following statements reflects how your social networks, both virtual and real, influence your food choices? 96% of the students in this class this semester said that their social networks, virtual and real, have permissive or positive and encouraging effects on their food choices. 4% of the students in this class said that their social networks, both virtual and real, have a proscriptive or limiting and restricting effect on their food choices. So, regardless of whether you landed in the 96% or in the 4%, it is very important for you to recognize that social networks can have a permissive effect, which is positive and encouraging. And that's something that you may want to build on when you're counseling clients and helping them learn to better manage their weight. You also want to recognize that social networks can have a proscriptive effect, a limiting or a restricting effect on people's food choices. And you want to keep that in mind when you're counseling clients who are struggling to manage their weight. If you find that a person's social networks, including your own, are having that limiting or restrictive effect on your food choices, you might just want to question which social networks you're belonging to. It might be time to snooze a few friends, if you will, on Facebook, or to join some different networks where you find that positive encouragement that is so important when you're trying to make behavior changes. So that's the results of our survey, our poll for this week. There's never a right or wrong answer, but it's interesting to think about these things and to see where you land in relation to your peers in class. This week, we had our first interactive discussion board, and I want to talk a little bit about the topic before I talk about the semantics of responding an online discussion board. So the topic for this week was insulin, and we were talking about the hormone insulin, its role in the body, and how insulin resistance might develop. And so there's a little image here. You can look at this. You see a hand, and it's holding up the word insulin resistance in the center. And you wonder, how does this happen? And it doesn't happen to everyone. It happens to some people. Insulin is a hormone that is produced in the pancreas. It is a storage hormone. And when insulin is released, its role is to get glucose out of the blood into the cell where the glucose can be used. So when you eat food, if we start at the very top of this cycle, if you look right in the center at the top, it says eat food, and then you see an arrow going to the right. We're going to follow that arrow around. That's the best way to read some of these diagrams when you get into the biochemistry of nutrition. Find a starting point and follow the arrow. Just work your way through it. So we eat food. What happens? The body breaks food down into glucose. Glucose gets into the blood. The pancreas is going to make insulin. That insulin, when it's working properly, will get the glucose out of the blood into the cell where it can be used. However, sometimes the body either doesn't recognize the insulin or it cannot use the insulin. When this happens, the glucose is stuck in the blood, and we have a condition that results called high blood glucose. And because the body is producing insulin but is not properly using it, we say that insulin resistance is occurring. That is insulin resistance. The body is making insulin, but for some reason, it is not able to recognize it or properly use it. When the cells resist insulin, that glucose is trapped in the blood, It then goes on, the glucose or sugar, to be stored as fat. The person, because the glucose didn't get into the cells to be used for energy, is feeling tired because they're low on energy, and they're also feeling hungry. So guess what they're going to do? They're going to eat more food, and we start what can become a vicious cycle. Insulin resistance is associated with many disease states. When a person becomes insulin resistant, the glucose is trapped in the blood. It's not getting into the cells, or all of it is not getting into the cells. So we have a condition of elevated blood glucose. When you have continued elevated blood glucose over time, you are on your way to developing type 2 diabetes. Many people are now diagnosed with pre-diabetes prior to being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. This doesn't happen for everyone. If you're not having regular physicals every year, you might miss the diagnosis of pre-diabetes and you might go straight to type 2 diabetes. It doesn't mean the pre-diabetes didn't exist. It doesn't mean it did exist, but sometimes that step can go undiagnosed. So insulin resistance, the full pathogenesis would be elevated blood glucose levels, then pre-diabetes, then type 2 diabetes. When you have type 2 diabetes, this can lead to cardiovascular disease. Insulin resistance can also lead to metabolic syndrome, and people who have metabolic syndrome also have higher risk for cardiovascular disease. So there is a strong relationship between insulin resistance and cardiovascular disease. I mentioned that I would also talk about the format of how to participate in a discussion board for maximum points. The very first post, your initial post or thread, is to be published by Wednesday night at 11:59. It needs to be a minimum of 200 words, and it needs to include a reference. When you include a reference, you will include it in APA format at the bottom in a reference list, and you will also include this reference in an in-text citation within your paragraph to support a statement that you've made. It's important that you learn how to write this way. This is a method of scientific writing using evidence to support statements that you make. We're using the APA style. After you post your initial post, you will need to publish 2 peer responses. You have until Sunday night at 11:59 to publish these, and these are shorter. They're a minimum of 75 words. I have published here an example of what I thought was a very strong peer response that someone in this class wrote. These PowerPoint slides are available to you online on D2L, so you can download a clean copy and read it for yourself. But a great way to write a peer response is to either agree or disagree with a point that one of your peer students made in their post. And if you agree, explain why and maybe share a reference that backs up why you agree with them. If you disagree, explain why you disagree and share a reference that backs up why you disagree with that student. Before we move on, a quick review of 3 main topics that we took a look at this week in class as it relates to obesity. We talked about psychological factors. Weight bias exists, it matters, and it may have long-lasting effects on people. Weight bias can be related to anxiety and to depression. It can also affect a person's decision to see or not see a medical professional. There's also socio-cultural or social influence mechanisms that are related to weight. Lastly, there are economical effects of being obese. There are direct costs associated with obesity and healthcare related to obesity. There are indirect costs associated with lost wages that people with obesity experience, either from being paid a lower wage because they're being discriminated against, because they have a lower level of education, because they had anxiety and depression and were afraid to educate themselves, or because they're sick more frequently and actually missing work. So there are economical effects as well. Due dates for this week. We have a group discussion this week, so remember that your initial 200-word post with a reference is due Wednesday night by 11:59 p.m., and your 2 peer responses, which are a minimum of 75 words each and should also include a reference if you're really on the board, those are due by Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. So my advice to you at this point, as always, stay up to date with the readings and watching the class videos. Complete that weekly survey for participation points. And remember to complete the discussion board with 3 posts. Make sure you're doing the word counts and including the references. You also are welcome to go ahead and start on your second assignment, which is an eating observation assignment. This is due on March 1st, a Sunday at 11:59 p.m. And I did publish out there for you, if you'd like to use it, an APA formatted template that you can write this paper in, which should set you all up for APA style. You don't have to use that, but you're welcome to use it if you would like. That template is available on D2L. Thank you so much for your time.